The blizzard hit Thorngate Market like a fist. Elias Dalton had been finishing his third circuit of the outer wall when the sky went white and the wind turned mean, and by the time he made it back to the gate arch, the snow was coming sideways, and the torches along the market's main street were guttering down one by one like candles pinched by careless fingers. He was a caravan guard by trade, lean, weathered, 28 years old, with a jaw that needed a shave and a coat that had seen better winters. And he had learned in 6 years of riding the long roads that a blizzard in the Cauldron Pass did not ask permission before it killed you. What he had not expected, when he ducked under the overhang of the old wayfarers' shed at the east end of the market square, was to find someone already there. She was standing with her back to him, one broad green hand pressed flat against the shed's outer wall as though testing whether it would hold, and she was enormous, not in the way that made a person feel soft and comfortable, but in the way that a drawn blade was enormous, all edge and intention. She stood close to 6.5 feet in her boots, which were stitched orc style with double-thick soles and wrapped in leather gaiters laced to the knee. Above the gaiters she wore fitted travel leathers the color of pine bark, the kind of trousers an orc warrior cut close to the leg for speed, and above that a sleeveless bodice of dark supple leather, laced tight across a powerful torso, leaving her thick green arms entirely bare in the killing cold. Over one shoulder she had slung a heavy fur-wrapped wolf, by the look of it, which she had not yet put on, as though she refused to admit the weather was winning. Her black hair was pulled into a knot at the back of her skull and fixed there with 2 bone pins, and her tusks curved upward from a full lower lip, in the way that Elias had been told all his life was meant to look fearsome, and which, if he was being entirely honest with himself, did not look fearsome to him at all. She turned the moment he stepped under the overhang, and he found himself looking into a pair of amber eyes that were, without question, the sharpest thing in Thorngate Market on that particular evening. "This is my shelter," she said. Her voice was low and deliberate, the kind of voice that did not need to be loud to reach you. Elias looked back out at the square. The snow was thick enough now that he could not see the chandler's stall he knew was only 40 feet away. He looked back at her. "There is approximately 1 blizzard standing between me and anywhere else," he said, "and this shed has 2 walls." She studied him with those amber eyes. He did not flinch. He had learned not to flinch at things. It was one of the 2 skills that had kept him alive on the long roads, the other being the ability to start a fire in almost any conditions. After a moment she said, "You are the caravan guard, Dalton." "Elias Dalton," he confirmed. "And you are Yash Frostwolf." She said it the way an orc said a name, like it meant something, like it was a fact about the world that you were expected to memorize and respect. "I trade iron out of the Cauldron camps. I had a stall in your market today." "Had," he said. "The storm took the canopy. The iron is under the stall floor, locked. I was looking for my horse when the pass closed." She paused. "He bolted. He is likely sheltering with the caravan animals on the north lot." "Probably," Elias agreed. "Horses are smarter than people about storms." She looked at him again, and something in her expression shifted, not quite softening but recalibrating. As though she had expected him to make the usual comments about orcs and horses and the north camps, and she was deciding what to do with the fact that he had not. "I will not crowd you," she said. It was not an apology. It was a statement of intended behavior. "I appreciate it," he said. "I have some tinder. If we can find anything dry in this shed, I can get a fire going." She looked at the shed. It was a wayfarer's building, which in Thorngate meant a leaning structure of old timber and pine boards, with a partial roof and an interior that smelled of axle grease and old hay. There was a stone ring on the earthen floor where previous travelers had clearly done exactly what Elias was proposing. Beside it, under a canvas that had kept the worst of the damp off, was a modest stack of split birch. Yash Frostwolf looked at the firewood and then looked at Elias, and something in her expression said she had been standing here for 20 minutes in the cold and had not permitted herself to use it because she had not wanted to be caught benefiting from something that was not hers. Elias did not comment on any of that. He went to the firewood, found the driest pieces at the bottom of the stack, and built the fire the way his old trail master had taught him, tight at the base, loose at the top, tinder in the heart of it where the wind would push air through rather than snuff it. He had the flame going in under 3 minutes. He sat back on his heels and held his hands over it. Behind him he heard a careful footstep on the earthen floor, and then another. When he glanced back, Yash Frostwolf was sitting, not standing, which surprised him, on the ground not 2 feet from his left shoulder. She had pulled the fur wrap around herself now, though she held one green arm free and extended it toward the fire, palm out, the way a person reached toward warmth when they had been cold for a long time but had too much pride to look like they needed it. She was very close. He could see the firelight picking out the architecture of her face, the strong brow ridge, the precise curve of her tusks, the way her amber eyes caught the light and held it. He could smell the cold coming off her in waves, and underneath it something that was just her pine resin and iron filings, and something else he did not have a name for, which was how it always was with people you had not met before. He said nothing. He turned back to the fire and held his hands over it. Outside, the blizzard screamed. Inside, the fire breathed between them. After a long minute, Yash said, "You are not afraid of me." "No," Elias said. "Most humans in this market are." "I know." He paused. "I have ridden the long roads for 6 years. I have shared fires with River Clan orcs in the gramest 2 hard winters running. One of them taught me that fire-building trick." He nodded at the flames, tight at the base. He felt rather than saw her look at him. What was his name? Goral. He was a river guide, good man. He paused. Died of fever the following spring. I was 3 weeks too far east to get to him. There was a silence that was not uncomfortable. "I am sorry," she said. "River guides know things no one else does." "He did," Elias agreed. The fire popped. Outside, the wind found a gap in the shed's planking and sang through it like a horn. Yash shifted slightly, and Elias felt the warmth of her presence as a distinct thing. She was not just a large person. She was a warm one, the kind of warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature and everything to do with the way a body felt when it had finally decided to be somewhere instead of somewhere else. She had sat very close to the fire. She had sat very close to him. He was aware of this in the way he was aware of weather, not anxiously, not excitedly, just as a fact of his surroundings that he would need to account for. He said, "The market will hold the purge meeting tomorrow." The warmth beside him went still. "I know," she said, and her voice was different now, controlled the way water was controlled by a dam with obvious force behind it. The purge meeting. That was what everyone was calling it, though the Thorngate Council preferred the phrase civil safety assessment, which was the kind of language councils used when they wanted to do something ugly and needed it to sound clean. It had been coming for 3 weeks, ever since Alderman Holt had brought his coalition of merchants and landowning farmers to the table and argued that the border market had become, as he put it, unmanageable in its current composition. What he meant was that the orc iron traders had undercut his cousin's forge prices by 30%, that the River Clan medicine women were drawing patients away from the town physician, and that the general presence of non-human traders in Thorngate's market square was offending the sensibilities of the people whose sensibilities he personally cared about. The purge he was proposing was not war. It was paperwork. Permits that non-human traders would need to purchase, at a price set high enough that most could not afford them, and a residency requirement that effectively banned anyone without a fixed Thorngate address from trading within the walls. Since no orc had a fixed Thorngate address, because no orc could own property in Thorngate under existing law, the whole mechanism was a circle that closed neatly on itself, like a noose. Elias had been sitting in on the market gossip for 2 weeks because that was part of his job. A caravan guard, who did not know the political weather of the towns on his route, was a caravan guard who drove his employer's goods into riots. He knew the shape of what was coming, and he knew that Yash Frostwolf, who had been trading iron in Thorngate's market for, by his count, at least 4 years, was exactly the kind of person the permit system would remove. She said, "They will pass it." "Maybe," he said. "Not maybe. Holt has 14 of the 16 council seats. He has been buying them for 2 years." She paused. "I have been watching." Elias looked at her sideways. She was watching the fire, her amber eyes steady, and her jaw was set in a way that told him she had already done the math on this many times and arrived at the same terrible answer each time. "What will you do?" he asked. "Take my iron and go back to the Cauldron camps." The words were flat. "What else is there? You could contest it." She turned to look at him then, fully and directly, and her expression was not quite disbelief. It was closer to the look a person gave a weather vane that was pointing the wrong direction. "A non-human contesting a permit ruling in a human council," she said. "I know it sounds like a sentence I do not survive," she said. "Not because they would kill me. Because they would laugh, and then they would arrest me for disturbing the assembly, and then they would pass the ruling anyway, and I would have nothing." She paused. "I learned this lesson before you were old enough to hold a sword, Elias Dalton." He looked back at the fire. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Your iron, what are you charging for the medium bars?" She blinked, clearly not expecting the direction shift. 14 coin per bundle of 10. Holt's cousin charges 19. "I know. Half the smiths in this market buy from you," he said. "Not just because of the price, because your iron is clean. I have seen the work that comes out of Bram Ketterley's forge on the South Street. He uses your stock, and his blades hold an edge for twice as long as anything made from Holt's cousin's pig iron. Everyone in this market knows it." Yash Frostwolf looked at him with an expression he was not quite sure how to read. "Why are you telling me things I already know?" "Because," Elias said slowly, "I do not think you have considered the possibility that the people who benefit from you might say so." She was quiet for a long time. The fire crackled and settled. Outside, the blizzard had reached the pitch where it stopped sounding like wind and started sounding like something with a voice. A long, continuous howl that ran around the shed's walls and tried the gaps in the boards and found them and came through in cold threads that the fire pushed back. She shifted again. She was still very close. He was aware of the warmth of her arm not quite touching his. "You are an unusual man," she said. "I am an ordinary man," he said. "No," she said, and the word was quiet but final, the way she said things like a pin going into a board. "Ordinary men have been crossing to the other side of the street when they see me for 4 years. You shared a fire with me in under 5 minutes." He thought about telling her it was his fire too, or technically the wayfarers' shed's fire, or one of the other deflecting things a person said when someone said something true about them that they did not know how to hold. He decided against all of that. "You were cold," he said simply. "And there was enough fire for 2. The shed groaned. The storm pressed in. Yash Frostwolf did not move away. She moved fractionally closer. The night wore on in that particular way a blizzard night wore on, which was slowly and very loudly. They talked because there was nothing else to do and because, Elias found, once you started talking to Yash Frostwolf it was difficult to stop. She was blunt in the way that people who have been lied to frequently learn to be. She did not soften things. She did not add courteous qualifications. She said what she knew and let you do what you liked with it. He found it restful. She told him about the Cauldron camps, not the romanticized version that travelers told each other around fires in the South, all drums and war paint and glory. The actual version, with the permafrost that cracked the tent stakes every spring and the iron smelting process that left your hands cracked and your lungs gray if you were not careful, and the 3-week journey to Thorngate over a pass that, as of tonight, had established its intention to kill anyone on it. He told her about the long roads. 6 years of caravan work, riding the routes between Thorngate and the river towns, sometimes as far south as the coast, sleeping under wagons when the inns were full and eating whatever the cook fire produced and making just enough coin to maintain his horse and his coat and his sword, which was a good one, a secondary point of pride alongside the fire starting. Why caravan work? She asked. It keeps moving, he said. She looked at him. Is that a virtue? He thought about it. I thought it was. I thought if I kept moving, I would not have to think about the fact that I did not have anywhere I particularly wanted to be. It was more than he had meant to say. He could feel the words sitting in the air between them. Yash Frostwolf did not express sympathy in the conventional way. She did not make a soft sound or reach over to touch him. She looked at the fire and said, I understand that. My clan camp is home, but it has not felt like mine for a long time. Why? Because I am the one who leaves, she said. Every spring I leave to trade. Every autumn I come back. And every year the camp is a little different. Someone has taken a mate. Someone has had a naming ceremony. Someone has died, and I missed it. I am always the one who missed it. She paused. After enough years of that, you stop thinking of yourself as someone who belongs somewhere and start thinking of yourself as someone who moves between places. He looked at her. The fire was between them, and her face was lit golden orange, the tusks gleaming, the amber eyes very level and very undefended in a way he suspected she did not show people often. That is exactly it, he said quietly. That is exactly the thing. She looked at him, and something happened in her expression, not a smile, because the situation did not call for a smile, but something that opened in her face like a door being unlocked. Recognition. The particular relief of being understood by someone you did not expect to understand you. They sat like that for a moment that was slightly longer than accidental. Then Yash said, the storm will break by dawn. The pass usually clears by mid-morning if the wind drops. Usually, Elias agreed. I need to be at the council meeting, she said. Not to contest it, just to know. I need to hear it from them directly. He nodded. He did not argue with this. He understood the need to look at the thing that was happening to you instead of hearing about it secondhand. I will be there, he said. She looked at him. Why? He was quiet for a moment. Because it matters, he said. And because I would like to see how it goes. Yash Frostwolf studied him for a long and careful moment and then looked back at the fire. She did not say anything else about it, but she did not move away. The fire burned low by the hour before dawn, and by then they had both stopped talking and were simply sitting in the particular silence of two people who have found an unexpected ease with each other and do not want to disturb it. Elias had added wood twice. The blizzard had reached its loudest and then, around the third hour after midnight, had begun to subside, the howl dropping to a low moan and then to a high whistle, and then to the kind of quiet that snow made when it was falling and not being driven. At some point Yash had shifted so that her shoulder was resting lightly against his, not leaning but touching, barely touching, the kind of contact that a person could plausibly claim was accidental, and both of them knew was not. He had not moved away. He had held very still, in fact, the way you held still when something rare and unaccountable came close. He did not sleep. She might have briefly. He heard her breathing change at some point, deepen and slow, and he let it, feeding the fire quietly so it did not wake her. If she slept sitting up, shoulders square, the fur wrap pulled around her like armor even in rest. She woke before dawn with a sharp inhalation and looked at him immediately, checking, and he met her eyes and said nothing, and she said nothing, and the moment passed like water over stone. The dawn came gray and white through the gaps in the shed boards. The blizzard had left 2 feet of snow on the square, and the world outside was the kind of hush that only happened after a great noise had stopped. They stood, both of them stiff, both of them doing the private calculations of cold muscles with the dignity of people who did not complain about things. Yash shook out the fur wrap and fixed it over her shoulders. The morning light hit her properly for the first time, and Elias was struck, not for the first time but more clearly than before, by how entirely composed she was, the tall warrior's body, the amber eyes sharp and awake despite the night, the fine angles of her face under the strong brow ridge. She caught him looking and raised one dark eyebrow, and he looked away with entirely more composure than he felt. "Thank you for the fire," she said. "Thank you for the company," he said. She paused at the shed's doorway, snow bright beyond her. Then she looked back over one shoulder and said, "Dalton." "Yash." The council meeting is at the second bell, and she walked out into the white morning. He stood in the shed for a moment longer, listening to the silence she had left behind, and then he banked the fire and followed. Thorngate Market, in the aftermath of the blizzard, was a town shaking itself awake under a burden of white. The main street was knee-deep in drifts, and the market stalls were buried under humps of snow that disguised them into a landscape of soft hills. Merchants and stallholders were out early with shovels and brooms, clearing what they could, and the general noise of the town had the particular frantic quality of commerce trying to recover lost time. Elias found his employer's caravan wagons on the north lot and confirmed that the horses were intact and the goods undamaged, which took most of the morning, and by the time he had filed his report and collected his morning meal from the caravan cook, he had maybe a quarter hour before the second bell. The council hall was the only stone building in Thorngate, 2 stories, a slate roof that had shed the snow better than anything else in town, and a set of double doors that were already standing open when Elias arrived. He could hear voices inside, many of them, all talking at once in the way that voices talked when people were angry and trying to be orderly about it. He went in. The hall was full. Thorngate's council met at a horseshoe table on a raised platform at one end of the hall, and the floor below was packed with people, merchants, smiths, farmers who had come in from the surrounding villages for the winter market, and a cluster of orc traders and river clan people standing near the back wall, not quite together, wearing the particular expression of people who knew they were the subject of the meeting and were waiting to find out how badly. Yash Frostwolf was among them. She stood at the edge of the orc group, slightly apart, her chin level and her amber eyes moving slowly and methodically around the room. She had found her horse, clearly. There was a saddle bag at her feet, and she had done something with her hair that morning, refixing the bone pins so that the black knot sat exactly at the center of the back of her skull. She looked, Elias thought, like the most composed person in the room. She saw him come in. She did not nod or wave. She simply noted him, and her eyes moved on, but not before something shifted in them, an acknowledgement, small and real, that he was there. Alderman Holt called the meeting to order with a bell, and a good deal of self-important throat clearing. He was a wide man with a gray beard and the kind of permanent flush in his cheeks that spoke of too much wine and too much righteous indignation for too many years. He had 14 votes. He had been planning this meeting for 6 months. He was, Elias could see from across the room, absolutely certain of the outcome. He outlined the permit system in language so carefully crafted that it barely sounded like what it was. Trading permits purchased annually to ensure the market's regulated and safe composition. A residency requirement for the safety of permanent market tenants. A graduated fee schedule, which began at a price that was merely steep for a prosperous human merchant, and which, by the time you reached the fee category that applied to non-permanent, non-human traders, was a number that Elias did the mental arithmetic on and confirmed was essentially impossible. He watched Yash while Holt spoke. Her face did not change. She had known this was coming, and she had prepared herself for it, and she was receiving the information with exactly the stillness she had used in the shed, the controlled water stillness, the force behind the damn stillness. Holt called for discussion. The 14 predictable voices spoke. There were 2 council members who voted against. A young woman named Sierra Pell, who was the market's recorded keeper, and who objected to the fee schedule on economic grounds, and an old man named Dav Ironholt, who ran the Eastern Supply Depot and who said, plainly and without drama, that half his best customers were orc traders and he would like to continue to have a business. Thank you. It was not enough. Holt was moving toward the vote, his voice carrying the satisfied weight of a man who had already counted the result. That was when Elias walked to the front of the room. He did not run. He walked, because running implied panic, and he was not panicking. He was doing a thing he had decided to do in the long, cold hours before dawn when he had been listening to a woman breathe beside a fire he had built and thinking about what it meant to have somewhere you belonged. He walked through the crowd, which parted for him because he was moving with purpose, and people stepped out of the way of purpose the way they stepped out of the way of loaded wagons. He stopped in front of the platform. He said, "Alderman Holt, I would like to address the council." Holt looked at him. "You are not a permanent market resident, Mr. Dalton." Elias Dalton, caravan guard for the Mercer Talon Trading Company, which has held a chartered route through Thorngate for 11 years, and whose contract specifically entitles its employees to address any market assembly pertaining to trade regulation. He had read the charter. He had read it specifically 2 weeks ago when the rumors started. He had said nothing to anyone about having read it. Holt's expression flickered. The charter was real, and Holt knew it was real, and both of them knew that disputing it in front of the assembled hall would require admitting he did not know his own market's legal documents. "Briefly," Holt said. Elias turned to face the room. He had never liked speaking in front of people. He was much better in one-on-one situations, which was part of why he liked caravan work. You were outside more often than inside, and when you were inside it was usually a tavern. But he knew something that Holt did not, which was that what he was about to say was true, and true things had a particular momentum. He said, "I want to ask the smiths in this room a question. Bram Ketterly. Your blades, your commission blades, the ones you quoted Merchant Lauren for last season, what stock are you using?" Ketterly, a broad-shouldered man in the middle of the crowd, looked startled. He said cautiously, "Frostwolf iron." "And the price per bundle?" 14 coin. "And what is the quality?" Ketterly said without hesitation. "Best in the Cauldron region. Clean smelt, consistent weight, takes a proper edge." He paused. "I will say that without being asked." Elias said, "Under the proposed permit schedule, what is the annual fee for a non-permanent, non-human trader like Yash Frostwolf?" Silence. Then someone near the back called out the number they had all just heard, 240 coin per year. More silence. Elias said, "Bram Ketterly, how much iron do you buy from Yash Frostwolf in a year?" Ketterly was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Enough that 240 coin would put her out of business. And then I would be buying Holt's cousin's pig iron at 19 coin, a bundle, and my blades would be half as good." "That is not the point of the regulation," Holt began. "It is the point," Elias said, and he did not raise his voice, but he turned slightly and looked at Holt directly. "The point is that every smith in this market, every supply depot, every caravan company that passes through and needs quality iron for its wagon hardware and its guard arms, is dependent on trade that this permit system is specifically designed to end. Not in the interest of market safety. In the interest of one man's cousin's forge prices." The room erupted. Holt was on his feet. "You have no standing to make accusations of personal interest. I have the Mercer Talon Charter," Elias said calmly, "which entitles me to address any trade regulation with full documentation of economic impact. I have that documentation." He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper that he had spent the previous 2 evenings filling with numbers: the iron prices, the comparative forge quality, the caravan hardware costs, the total annual trade value of all the Orc and River Clan stalls in Thorngate Market, which came to a figure that was, he had found, almost exactly 1/3 of the market's total annual revenue. He put the paper on the table in front of the council. 1/3, he said. "If you pass this permit system, you will lose 1/3 of your market's revenue in the first year. Because the traders who cannot afford 240 coin will leave, and the merchants who depended on them will go elsewhere, and the caravans that came because those merchants were here will reroute." He paused. "You can pass it, but I wanted you to know the actual number." He stepped back. The silence in the room was the kind that had weight. Alderman Holt's face was the color of the fire embers, deep red, on its way to something worse. He said, voice tight and controlled, "The vote will proceed." But it did not proceed the way he had planned. Because 3 of his 14 were smiths, and 2 of his 14 ran supply operations, and 1 of his 14 had a brother who sold wagon hardware to the caravans, and the number Elias had put on the table was real, and people in markets understood real numbers in a way they did not always understand principle. The vote was 9-7. The permit system failed. The noise in the room was enormous. Holt was shouting something at the council keeper. People were talking over each other. The orc traders and river clan people near the back wall were very still, very quiet, in the way of people who had not yet decided whether to believe what they had just heard. Elias turned and walked back through the crowd. He was breathing harder than he would have liked, and his hands were doing a slight thing they did sometimes after high-stakes moments, a fine tremor that he kept flat against his coat so no one would see it. He walked back to the edge of the hall. He walked directly to Yash Frostwolf. She was looking at him. She had been looking at him, he realized, since he turned from the council table. The amber eyes were very bright and very still, and her hands were at her sides, both of them, and she was doing the same controlled water thing she had been doing all morning, but it was cracking slightly at the edges. He could see that like ice at the first real warmth. She said very quietly, "You had that paper in your coat this morning." "Yes," he said. "You were planning this." "I was considering it," he said. "I was not sure it would work." She looked at him for a long moment. Behind them the hall was still in full noise. Then she said, "Why?" And he looked at her and said the thing he had decided to say, which was the true thing. "Because you have been trading here for 4 years and you are good at it and the iron is good and it is not right. And because he started again. Because I would like the chance to know you better, and that is harder to do if you are in the Cauldron camps and I am on the long roads." Yash Frostwolf was very still. Then she said, "That is a long way to go for a declaration of interest." "I was making the economic argument anyway," he said. "The personal interest was a secondary consideration." She looked at him, and the thing that had been cracking at the edges of her composure broke open entirely, and she laughed a real laugh, low and full and surprised, the kind of laugh that lived in the chest and meant something. It lasted only a moment before she contained it again, but it had been there, and Elias held the sound of it like a coal in his chest. She said, "Walk with me. I need to check my iron stall." He walked with her. Outside the council hall the snow was blinding white and the town was awake and buzzing. The verdict spreading through the market stalls the way news spread in markets. Instantly, imperfectly, loudly. People stopped to look as they walked out together. Yash Frostwolf at her full height with the wolf fur over her shoulders and Elias at his ordinary height beside her. And there were looks, because there were always looks. And Elias was aware of all of them and filed them away in the part of his mind that was always tracking the political weather, and focused instead on the fact that she was walking with him with her chin up and her stride long and easy, and that she had chosen to walk with him. And that the morning light on the snow was extraordinary. She led him to the east side of the market where her stall had been, and they dug out the lock box from under the stall floor together. And the iron inside was exactly as she had described it, clean and dark and heavy, bundled neatly in tens with wire. She ran her hands over it the way a person ran their hands over something they had made and were proud of, and he watched her do it and understood that this was what she came here for every year, the thing she had built, not the trade itself exactly, but the craft behind it, the knowing of iron. She said, without looking up from the bundles, "What are you doing after this caravan run?" "Heading south," he said. "The Mercer Talon spring route." And after the spring route, he was quiet for a moment. "I had not decided." She lifted her eyes from the iron and looked at him. "Thorngate has a permanent caravan guard position. I heard it mentioned last week. The Market Association offers it for someone willing to winter here." He held her gaze. "Is that a recommendation?" "It is a piece of information," she said. "What you do with it is your business." He said, "Would you be here in the winter?" She looked at him steadily. "I would be here," she said. "My stall is not going anywhere, as of this morning." He nodded slowly. "Then I will consider the information seriously." The corner of her mouth moved, not quite a smile, something that preceded a smile, the shape of it before the warmth came fully in. She turned back to the iron and said, "Help me move these to the supply lockup. They are heavy." "I noticed," he said, and picked up a bundle. The next 3 days were the end of the winter market, and they were busy in the way that end-of-market days were always busy, with merchants selling off the last of their stock at reduced prices and caravan companies finalizing their route contracts for the spring, and the general scramble of packing and tallying that accompanied the end of anything. Elias finished out his caravan obligations, escorting the last 3 wagons as far as the south gate, and watching them go with the particular feeling of a man who has decided not to go with them. He had sent a rider ahead with a letter to Mercer Talon. He had talked with the Market Association representative about the permanent guard position. He had done these things quietly between obligations and had told no one, because the decision felt private in a way he was not ready to make public. He told Yash. He found her on the second afternoon loading the last of her iron onto her supply wagon, and he came and helped without being asked, and when they were done he said, "I sent the letter." She looked at him carefully. "And Mercer Talon is fine with it. They have another guard for the spring route." He paused, and the association said yes. Yash Frostwolf set down the bundle she was holding. She looked at him for a long moment in the white winter light, the wolf fur over her shoulders, the amber eyes level and very warm, and she said quietly, "You stayed." "I stayed," he agreed. She crossed the distance between them. It was 3 steps, no more, and she moved with the decisive momentum she brought to everything, and she put her hand warm and broad and very green against the side of his face, and she held it there, and he put his hand over hers and held it there too, and for a moment neither of them said anything. She said, "I am not a simple person to be with." "I know," he said. "I am not looking for simple. I leave in the spring and come back in the autumn every year. And I will be here," he said. "Every autumn." She searched his face. He let her search. He was not hiding anything. She said, "In my clan, when a woman makes a claim, she marks it." She paused. "It is a custom, not a demand." He said, "What kind of mark?" She reached into the collar of her leather bodice and produced a cord braided leather, very fine, with 2 iron beads on it, the kind of thing that was too deliberate to be accidental jewelry. She said, "I made this 2 days ago, after the council meeting. I was not sure I would." She stopped. "I was not sure you would want it." He looked at the cord and looked at her. "Put it on me," he said. Her hands were very steady as she tied it around his wrist. The iron beads were warm from being against her skin. The cord was the exact dark color of the iron in her stall, and he understood, without being told, that she had used her own iron to make the beads, that it was not a coincidence. When she was done, she held his wrist for a moment, both hands around it, and he felt the warmth of her grip and the weight of what it meant. He raised his other hand and tucked a strand of her black hair back that the wind had pulled loose, very gently, and she went very still under his touch, the way large, powerful things went still when they were surprised by tenderness. He said, "I should probably learn the rest of the customs." She said, very quietly, "You have time." He kissed her then, because it was the right moment, and because he was not a man who let right moments pass out of excessive caution. He had to reach up slightly, and she had to angle down slightly, and when they met in the middle it was warm and certain and very real. Not a question, but an answer to a question that had been sitting in the shed with them through the blizzard. The question that was asked every time she had shifted closer to the fire, and every time he had not moved away. She kissed him back with the same decisive momentum she brought to everything. When they broke apart, the market square around them had gone very quiet. Or perhaps it hadn't. Perhaps the market was exactly as loud as it always was, and neither of them could hear it properly. She looked at him. The amber eyes were the warmest thing he had ever seen. "The pass will be open in 3 days," she said. "If you want to see the cauldron camps, I can show you, before you start the permanent post." He said, "I want to see everything." The Cauldron Pass, once the blizzard's aftermath had been beaten back by 2 days of hard sun, was a brutal and magnificent thing. A narrow road cut into the side of a mountain that was still very much under the impression it owed humans and orcs nothing at all. Elias rode it beside Yash's supply wagon. his horse picking careful steps through the ice-glazed ruts, and the view from the high point of the pass was the kind of view that made a person feel very small and very alive simultaneously. The Cauldron camps came into sight in the early afternoon of the second day, a cluster of long houses and hide tents set in a valley that was more sheltered than anything at the pass elevation, though sheltered was a relative term this far north. There were fires burning in front of several of the long houses and children running between the structures, and as Yash's wagon rolled into the central space, the kind of organized attention that a community directed at a returning member. They knew her. Of course they knew her, she came back every autumn, and these were her people. But they looked at Elias with the careful assessment that any community gave a stranger, and he held himself steady under it, and nodded to the people who met his eyes and waited. Yash introduced him in the orc tongue first, which he did not speak, and then in the common tongue, which was polite. She said, "Elias Dalton." He held the market vote that kept our trade rights in Thorngate. This produced a reaction he had not expected, not hostility but a sharp, interested attention, the kind of attention that communities with hard histories gave people who had done something concrete for them. An old woman with gray-streaked hair and tusks like ivory asked him several questions in the common tongue that were extremely direct and which he answered honestly, and the woman looked at Yash afterward and said something in the orc tongue that made Yash's ears go slightly pointed. A flushing response, he would learn later, the orc equivalent of color in the cheeks. He spent 5 days in the camp. He helped with the work that was available. He was not trained in iron smelting, but he could carry and stack, and he was useful at things that required patience, which the camp had no shortage of need for. He ate meals at the communal fire and slept in the guest portion of Yash's long house, and learned the names of enough people to feel like a person rather than a visitor. On the third night Yash came and sat beside him at the communal fire, not on the other side of it, not at a polite distance, but beside him, her shoulder against his, and no one in the camp made anything of it, because they were her people and she had marked him, and that was a settled thing in their world. He said quietly so only she could hear, "The old woman, what did she say to you?" Yash looked at the fire. "She said you have good eyes." "What does that mean?" "It means she could see that you look at things as they are rather than as you want them to be." A pause. "It is a high compliment." He thought about that. "And what did she say after that? The part that made your ears go sharp?" Yash turned and looked at him, and the firelight was on her face, and she said plainly, "She said she had wondered when I would stop traveling alone." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "And?" She turned back to the fire and said, "And I told her it had been a long winter." He understood what she was saying and what she was not saying, and he thought that he had learned, in 5 days, enough about how she expressed things to hear both. He put his hand, carefully, over hers where it rested on her knee. Her fingers turned and closed over his without hesitation. They sat like that for a long time. On the 4th day there was a complication that arrived in the form of a rider, one of the Cauldron camp's scouts, coming back from the direction of the pass with news that Elias read from the man's posture before he had ridden 100 yards into the valley. Something wrong, something requiring decisions. The news was that Alderman Holt had not accepted the council vote. This was, in retrospect, not a surprise. A man who had spent 2 years purchasing council votes did not walk away from a 7-9 loss and consider the matter resolved. Holt had apparently spent the 3 days after the vote filing a charter challenge, arguing that the Mercer-Talon trade charter did not, in fact, extend to individual employees making formal economic arguments before the full assembly, and that therefore Elias' argument should be struck from the record and the vote retaken. The charter challenge was legally dubious at best, because the charter said what it said and Elias had read it correctly. But legal dubiousness had never stopped a man with money from trying. More importantly, Holt had filed a secondary claim, that the permit system, having been voted down in open assembly, could be reinstated through an emergency market ordinance, which required only Holt's signature as senior alderman and the agreement of one other council member. He had found his one other council member. The ordinance was to be posted in 3 days. Yash took this information with the expression of a person who has suspected all along that the wall they climbed over would simply grow back. She stood in the valley with the scout's report in her hands. He had written it out, which was unusual and meant it was meant for her specifically, and her amber eyes were flat and very steady. "He will do it," she said. "The ordinance." "Probably," Elias agreed. "Unless it is challenged in the market court." She looked at him. "Is that possible? The market court can hear ordinance challenges." "But the petitioner needs to be a registered market party, someone with a stake in the market's official record." He paused. "My employer, Mercer Talon, is registered. If they agree to file the challenge, the ordinance would be frozen pending the court's decision." "Will they agree?" "I sent them a very honest letter about the 1/3 revenue number," he said, "and I included their specific root income from Thorngate Orc Iron Hardware." He paused. "I think they will agree." Yash looked at him for a long moment. "You have been 3 steps ahead of this since the beginning," she said. "1 step," he said. "Sometimes half a step. I have been moving fast." She looked at him with an expression that was not quite admiring. Admiration was too simple for what it was. It was more like the look she gave good iron, the look of recognizing something that had been made well and would hold under pressure. She said, "If the court agrees to hear it, I should be there." "You should," he said. "Not in the back of the room this time." She looked at him, and the corner of her mouth moved in the way it did when she was not quite smiling but was very close. "No," she agreed, "not in the back." They rode back to Thorngate 3 days later, which was 2 days faster than Elias would ordinarily have attempted the past journey in winter. But Yash moved through the high country with the ease of someone who had made this trip 40 times, and her horse, recovered from its blizzard night panic and restored to its usual character, which was extremely competent, kept pace without complaint. The market court was not the grand stone council hall. It was a smaller room in the back of the charter keeper's office, with 3 judges, a recording clerk, and the kind of cramped formality that suggested it did not hold dramatic proceedings very often. Alderman Holt was present with a very composed legal advocate who had clearly been brought in from the city. The Mercer Talon representative, a brisk woman named Laura Gann, who had ridden through the night and was visibly irritated about it, and channeling that irritation productively, was seated at the petitioner's table. Elias sat beside Laura Gann. Yash sat on his other side. This was not conventional. Non-party individuals did not typically sit at the petitioner's table. Holt's advocate objected to it immediately, and Laura Gann said, in the voice of a woman who had been doing this for 20 years, "Yash Frostwolf is the registered holder of a Thorngate Market stall, recorded in the market ledger, which makes her a registered market party with full standing in any proceeding pertaining to market trade regulations. I will provide the ledger entry if the court requires it." She produced the ledger entry because of course she had, and the objection died. Holt's advocate was very good. He argued the emergency ordinance provisions with real legal precision, and Elias sat and listened and took quiet notes on a scrap of paper and passed them occasionally to Laura, who read them without expression and incorporated them with the efficiency of someone who did not need to be told twice. The argument about the ordinance turned, finally, on a single provision: whether an emergency market ordinance could be used to reimpose a regulation that had been formally voted down in open assembly within the preceding 30 days. The charter, it turned out, was ambiguous on this point. The old language could be read either way. The chief judge called for arguments on the specific provision, and Holt's advocate gave a precise and technically impressive reading of the ambiguous language that supported the ordinance. Laura Gann gave a clear and straightforward reading that opposed it. The judges conferred. Then Yash Frostwolf said quietly, "May I speak?" It was not a question. The chief judge looked at her. Holt's advocate began to object. The chief judge, who was an old man with a face like a walnut and eyes that had seen 30 years of charter disputes, raised one hand and said, "You have standing. Speak." Yash stood. She was the tallest person in the room by a significant margin, and the morning light came through the charter keeper's window and hit her cleanly, the amber eyes level and very steady, the wolf fur over her shoulders, the iron cord bracelet on her wrist that matched the one on Elias' wrist. He had not registered until this moment that she was wearing one too, that she had made a matching one for herself. She said, "The charter provision is ambiguous, and the judges will rule on it as they see fit. But I would like to say something about what this proceeding actually is." The judge nodded. She said, "I have traded iron in this market for 4 years. I have paid my stall fees, followed the market rules, and kept my accounts in the ledger, the one on this table, in good order. I have not been arrested, fined, or cited for any violation. I have 24 accounts on record with Thorngate merchants, all of them in good standing." She paused. "The permit system that was voted down last week and the emergency ordinance that is now its replacement have one purpose. They are designed to remove me and people like me from this market, not because we have done anything wrong, but because we are not human." Holt was visibly controlling himself. Yash said, "I am not asking for special treatment. I am asking for the same treatment as any other registered market trader who has kept to the rules and paid the fees. The charter of this market says, and I have read it, because unlike some people I do not assume that documents written by others contain nothing useful to me, that market standing, once registered, cannot be revoked except by evidence of misconduct or by open assembly vote." She paused. "There was an open assembly vote. It went 9-7 in my favor. That is the charter's mechanism. An emergency ordinance is not the mechanism. It is a way around the mechanism." She sat down. The courtroom was very quiet. The chief judge looked at his 2 colleagues. They conferred in whispers for long enough that the silence became its own thing, a living, breathing silence that had opinions. Then the chief judge said, "The petition is granted. The emergency ordinance is struck. The open assembly vote of 9-7 stands as the market's governing decision on the permit system for a period of no less than 2 years, at which point it may be revisited by open assembly." He looked at Holt. "Alderman Holt, you may not attempt to reinstate this regulation through ordinance. You would need a new open assembly vote, which you are welcome to pursue when the 2-year period expires." Holt stood, opened his mouth, and the judge said mildly, "That will be all, Alderman." Holt sat. Outside the charter keeper's office, in the cold winter air of the market street, with the snow still deep along the buildings and the morning light very bright off it, Elias stood beside Yash and felt the particular quiet of a thing being over. She said, "He will try again. In 2 years." "Probably," Elias agreed. "And we will deal with it in 2 years," she said. "Not we meaning a collective, a very specific we." He looked at her. She was looking at the market street, at the stalls and the merchants and the orc traders who were still here, still trading, still here. The morning light was on her face, and she looked, he thought, like the most solid thing in the street, the thing that was not going to move. He said, "Yash." She looked at him. He said, "Last night in the camp, when you told the old woman it had been a long winter," she waited. "I have been alone a long time," he said. "On the roads, moving like I told you. Not because I wanted to, but because I did not have a reason to stop." He paused. "I have a reason now." Yash Frostwolf looked at him with those amber eyes that missed nothing and held everything they found, and she said quietly, "Say what you mean, Elias." He said, "I mean that you matter more to me than the road. I mean that when I think about the spring and the summer and the next winter, what I think about first is where you are." He held her gaze. "I mean that I would like to stop moving, here, with you." She was very still. Around them the market went on, voices, horses, the distant ring of a hammer from a forge. All the ordinary noise of a place that did not know it was the background of the most important conversation Elias Dalton had ever had. She said, "You are a caravan guard from the long roads with a horse and a sword and a very good fire-starting technique." "Yes," he said. "And you are proposing to build a life in a border market with an orc iron trader who leaves every spring and comes back every autumn." "Yes," he said. "You understand that people will have opinions about that." "They had opinions in the council hall," he said, "and in the court. They can keep having them." She looked at him for a moment longer. Then she reached out and took his hand, both of hers around his one, the way she had held his wrist when she put the cord on it, and she held it and said very quietly, "I have not let anyone stay before." "I know," he said. "I did not know how to let someone stay," she said. "I kept leaving before they could." She paused. "I sat close to your fire in the blizzard because it was the only one there was, but I stayed close because you did not move away." He said, "I was not going to move away." "I know that now," she said. "I knew it by morning." A pause, very small. "I was afraid of it." He turned his hand in hers and held them. "And now?" She looked at him, and the amber eyes were warm and direct and fully open in the way they had been that night in the shed when she had laughed, that real surprised laugh from the chest, and she said, "And now I am choosing it." He brought her hands up and pressed them to his chest, over his coat, over the cord at his wrist that touched his heartbeat. She came with them, leaned forward and down and pressed her forehead to his, green and warm against winter cold, and he closed his eyes and breathed. She said against his temple in a voice barely above a whisper, "In my tongue there is a word Kethvar. It means the person you stop being alone for." He said, "Say it again." She said it again. He said it back badly, and she made a sound against his temple that was a laugh and was not, and he held her hands harder. The market street went on around them. The light was the pale gold of winter morning, the kind that came after storms, and the snow was very white, and the sky was very blue, and the two of them stood in the middle of Thorngate's Market Street, in front of all the stalls and all the merchants and all the opinions in the world, and held on to each other and did not move. Spring came eventually, the way spring came to high country, late and reluctant, and then suddenly all at once, the snow vanishing from the market square in a week while it still clung to the pass above. Elias had taken up the permanent guard post and had spent the winter months learning the market's rhythms, the supply patterns, the merchant politics, the particular trouble spots that every market had, the places where disputes started and the people who started them. He was good at it in the way he was good at the long roads, patient, observant, willing to stand between things. He had also begun, quietly and with no fanfare, learning basic orc trade tongue from Yash on the evenings when they sat at the fire in her rented room above the supply depot, which was not a romantic setting, being a drafty upper room with a low ceiling and a narrow window, but which had a very good iron stove that he had personally repaired, and which felt, in the specific way that places could feel when the right person was in them, more like a home than anything he had lived in since the bunk wagon days. She was a patient and demanding teacher who did not accept approximations. She would make him repeat a word until the vowel sounds were correct, and she would not tell him he had done well unless he actually had, and he found this not discouraging but deeply reassuring. He could trust what she said because she did not say things she did not mean. In return, he taught her the trade charter clauses she had not yet memorized, and the 3 or 4 legal mechanisms that still existed in Thorngate's documents for non-human traders that Holt and his coalition apparently either did not know about or hoped others did not know about. She took these like iron or raw material, to be refined and put to use. She made him a proper cord bracelet in the spring to replace the winter one that had frayed. This one had 3 iron beads. He asked what the 3 beads meant, and she said, in that flat way that was not flat at all, "First bead is the fire, second bead is the court, third bead is the Kethvar." She paused. "That one does not have an equivalent in your language." "I know what it means," he said. She looked at him. "Yes," she said, "you do." She left for the Cold Run camps in late spring, the wagon loaded with fresh stock, and the horse fresh shod from Bram Ketterly's forge. He stood at the south gate and watched her go and held the particular feeling of it. The absence that was specific, not general, not the old road-moving absence, but the absence of a specific warm presence and a specific pair of amber eyes, and the specific sound of a voice that said things it meant. It was, strangely, less painful than the old loneliness, because the old loneliness had been about having nowhere to come back to. This was about having exactly somewhere to come back to, and waiting, and knowing the distance had an end. She sent word twice over the summer, through camp riders and caravan posts, not long letters. She was not a letter-writing person, but short messages that were precise and informative, and ended with the Orc word for coming back to, which he had looked up in the trade tongue glossary that one of the River Clan elders had left in the market library, and which he had written down and kept in his coat pocket. He wrote back. He was a letter-writing person. She sent a response that was 3 lines and said that his handwriting was bad but readable, and that the market news was interesting, and that she was. He read the last word 3 times, impatient for autumn. He put that letter in the same pocket as the trade tongue word. Autumn came, and with it the first wagon trains from the north, the supply caravans that meant the pass was open and the camp traders were moving. He took his morning post at the south gate out of habit and watched the road. On the 3rd day of the trader's return, he was standing at the gate when he heard her horse before he saw it, a big, gray, distinctive gate, the sound he had been listening for without knowing he was listening for it. The wagon came around the tree line and into the open road that led to the gate, loaded with iron bundles. Yash Frostwolf on the wagon seat with her black hair down loose in the autumn wind for the first time he had ever seen it, the wolf fur over her shoulders, the amber eyes finding him across 200 yards of empty road with an accuracy that had nothing to do with distance. She pulled the wagon up to the gate. She looked down at him from the wagon seat. He looked up at her. The amber eyes were very warm. She said the pass was muddy. Autumn pass always is, he agreed. She said, I brought better iron this season. Spent the summer refining the smelt process. A pause. Gorel's fire-building principle, tight at the base, turns out to apply to iron smelting. He smiled at that, a real smile, and she looked at the smile in the way she looked at things she was deciding what to do with. She climbed down from the wagon. She was taller than him and broader than him, and she had been traveling for 3 days and there was road dust on her boots. And she came to him, and he held out his wrist with the cord bracelet, and she pressed her fingers to the 3 iron beads, one after another fire, court, Kethvar. And then she put both hands on his face the way she had that first time in the market square and held it. He said, You were gone too long. She said, I know. He said, Don't do it again. She said, I will do it every year. I know, he said, I'm going to complain about it every year. She looked at him with the warmth that had started in the shed, that first fire, the warmth that was not simple and was not small and was not going anywhere. She said, I missed you. He said, I know, I missed you too. He covered her hands with his against his face. Welcome back. She kissed him at the gate with all of Thorngate's autumn market arriving around them. Wagons and horses and merchants and orc traders and all the opinions in the world. And he kissed her back with everything he had, which was not a sword or a charter or a very good fire-starting technique, but which was the specific and ordinary and irreplaceable fact of being someone who saw her as she was and wanted that, exactly that, and nothing else. The evening of her first day back, they sat at the iron stove in the drafty upper room, which was less drafty now because he had spent the summer caulking the window frames, and she looked at the window frames for a long time and did not say anything. But she ran her fingers over the work carefully, the way she ran her fingers over good iron, and he understood what that meant. They ate together and talked. She told him about the summer in the camp, the smelt improvements, the old elder who had sent a message for him that was approximately a formal greeting but which carried, in the orc custom, the weight of acceptance, of family inclusion, the kind of thing that was not said directly but was said absolutely. He told her about the market summer, the 2 trade disputes he had mediated, the new caravan route from the east that was bringing different goods and different politics, and the fact that Alderman Holt had been very quiet since the court ruling, which was either a good sign or a very bad one. She thought it was a bad one. She said she would be watching. He said he would watch too. She said, together then. He said, together. Later, when the stove had burned down to coals and the autumn dark was full outside, they sat close in the firelight, as close as they had sat in the blizzard shed. Closer, the distance between them, not the careful distance of two strangers at a fire, but the deliberate closeness of two people who had chosen each other and were choosing each other now in this specific moment. He said quietly, "I need to tell you something." She looked at him. He said, "I have been thinking these past months about what I am doing here, what I am to you." He paused. "I do not want to be someone you come back to as a convenience or someone who is comfortable. I want," he stopped, started again. "I want to be the place you want to come back to, the way you are the reason I stopped moving." Yash Frostwolf was very still. The stove light was on her face and her amber eyes were very serious and very present. She said, "Elias." He held her gaze. She said, "You are my Kethvar." I did not say that word lightly. In my clan, when a woman names her Kethvar, it is because she has decided, not considered, decided. She paused. "I decided in the shed, in the dark. When you fed the fire so it would not wake me." Another pause, smaller. "I pretended to be asleep. I was watching you." He was quiet for a moment. He said, "You were watching me. You were being very careful," she said, "very quiet. You thought no one was watching." A pause. "That is when you learn what a person is." He thought about what he had been doing in those hours, simply tending the fire, adding wood carefully so the sound would not disturb her, because she needed sleep and because it had seemed like the right thing to do and for no other reason. He thought about the fact that she had been watching. He said, "What did you decide?" She looked at him for a moment. Then she reached across the space between them and took his hand and placed it against the iron cord on her own wrist, the matching one, 3 beads. "That," she said. "I decided that." He pressed his hand to the cord. He felt the iron beads, the warmth of her wrist under them. He leaned forward, and she came to meet him, and they kissed in the cold light of the iron stove, slow and certain. The kiss of people who are not rushing towards something because they have already arrived. Her hand came up to his jaw, and his hand found the back of her neck under the fall of black hair, and it was warm and it was real, and it was the specific gravity of two people who had found each other across every road and every distance and every wall that the world had built between them. There was no drama in it. There was just the two of them close in the warmth. He said, against her mouth, "Kethvar." She made a sound that was not quite a word and was everything one. The winter settled into Thorngate like a long exhale. The market contracted to its winter composition, fewer stalls, closer quarters, the particular intimate economy of a market that had turned inward against the cold. Yash's stall was one of the ones that stayed open, the iron always in demand even in the slow months, and Elias kept his post at the gates and his routes through the market and his winter evenings at the stove in the upper room. They were, very quietly and without announcement, building a life. It was not simple. She had strong opinions about everything, and so did he, and they disagreed frequently and specifically, and without the kind of polite hedging that left things unresolved. She thought he was too patient with market merchants who were testing boundaries. He thought she was too quick to write off people who were genuinely confused rather than deliberately hostile. They argued about this with the directness of two people who had agreed that the other person was worth arguing with honestly rather than simply tolerating. They were both right, some of the time, and willing to say so, which was rarer than it should have been, and which made the things they built together actually hold. Holt made his move in midwinter. Not another council vote. He was smarter than that. He filed a complaint with the Regional Market Authority, a body above Thorngate's local council, arguing that the open assembly process had been corrupted by unauthorized legal intervention from a private caravan company, and requesting a regional review. Elias read the complaint filing when Laura Gann sent it by fast rider, and he sat with it in the upper room and read it twice and then put it down on the table. Yash read it once and set it down. She said, "He is not stopping." "No," Elias agreed. "The regional authority is in Caldenmore," she said. 3 days ride south." "I know." She looked at him. "Are you going to tell me that you have read the regional charter?" he said. "I have read the relevant portions." She looked at him with an expression that was the warmest and most exasperated thing he had ever seen. "Of course you have. The regional authority has a provision for third-party trade impact statements," he said. "Any registered market party can submit one. It goes into the official review record, and the authority is required by regional charter to address it in their ruling." She said, "How many registered market parties in Thorngate would submit a statement supporting us?" he said. "I spent the week before the blizzard making a list. Would you like to see it?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said in the quiet voice, the serious voice, "Elias, that blizzard was 6 months ago. You had that list before we had spoken." "I had a draft of the list," he said. "I was not sure I would use it." "What changed your mind?" he said. "You sat close to the fire." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That is not a strategic reason." "No," he agreed. "It was not a strategic decision." She looked at him across the table, across the trade filing and the regional charter notes and all the careful machinery he had been building since before he had any right to be building it for her. And he let her look, because he was done being someone who hid things out of excessive caution. She said, "You had decided before we spoke." "I had decided I wanted to know you," he said carefully. "I had not decided anything beyond that. The rest," he paused. "The rest was you." She held his gaze for a long time. Then she stood and came around the table, and he turned his chair to face her, and she crouched, which brought her almost to his eye level, which was something she did sometimes when she wanted to be level with him, a deliberate choice, and put both hands on his knees. She said, "I am going to Caldenmore with you." "I was going to ask," he said. "You were going to ask," she agreed. "I am not waiting to be asked. I am the registered market party. This is my fight." "Our fight," he said. She looked at him, and the amber eyes were very direct, and she said, "Yes, ours." She held his gaze. "When we get there, I will speak for myself before that authority. Not you, not Laura Gann, me." "I know," he said. "And you will be there," she said. It was not a question. "I will be standing right next to you," he said. "The whole time." She pressed her hands on his knees and stood and said, "Then let us go to Caldenmore." The 3-day ride south was the hardest and most interesting journey Elias had taken on the long roads. They rode hard, camping 2 nights on the road, and in the evenings she talked about the iron camps with a specificity she had not offered before, the technical details of the smelt process, the mineral composition of the cauldron ore that made it different from what the southern forges worked with, the generations of knowledge that had been built into the technique. He listened and learned and asked questions that she answered with a precision that made clear she had rarely had someone who wanted to know. He told her about the routes, the specific geography of the long roads, the political personalities of the towns along them, the way trade worked at the level of wheels on rutted roads and coin in careful hands. She asked questions that were astute and specific, and he realized, not for the first time, that she had been running a trade operation across a mountain pass for years with the kind of economic intelligence that most merchants paid advisors to provide. On the second night they slept beside a road fire that he built and she fed, and they slept wrapped together under the combined warmth of his coat and her wolf fur, which was the most practical arrangement in 30-degree cold and was also the arrangement they both chose without discussion, lying on the cold ground under the stars, her arm around him and his head against her shoulder and the fire burning steadily beside them. He thought, "This is what it is, this specific thing. This is what I was traveling toward on all the roads without knowing it." She was already asleep. Her breathing was the steady, deep rhythm of a person who slept when they needed to, wherever they needed to, without anxiety about it. He lay awake a little longer and looked at the stars and felt the weight of her arm, and thought that the word Kethvar was probably the best word in either of their languages. Caldenmore was a proper city, the regional seat, with stone streets and a 3-story market authority building, and the smell of coal smoke and river water. Elias had been here twice on caravan routes and knew the shape of it. Yash had been here once, years ago, for a different trade dispute that had not gone well, and she moved through its streets with the alertness of someone who had been unwelcome here before and was not assuming it had changed. The regional authority hearing was not a court. It was a review panel, 3 authority members seated behind a long table in a wood-paneled room that was meant to feel less confrontational than a courtroom, and succeeded in feeling more procedural, which was its own kind of pressure. Holt had sent his legal advocate. Laura Gann was present. The trade impact statements were submitted, 14 of them, from smiths and supply depot operators and caravan companies who used Thorngate as a route stop, all of them saying in precise economic language what Elias had said in the council hall 6 months earlier. The advocate went through his arguments. They were good arguments, technically, about process and charter precedent. The review panel listened with the patience of people who had heard many technically good arguments. Then Yash stood. She stood without being asked, simply stood, and the panel's senior member looked at her and said, carefully, "This is not a speaking procedure. Written submissions only." Yash said, "I have a written submission." She placed it on the table. "I am also a registered market party appearing before this authority regarding a ruling that directly affects my livelihood. The Regional Charter's Provision 12 allows registered parties direct address in review hearings." She met the senior member's eyes. "I read Provision 12. There was a pause. The senior member looked at his colleagues. Then he said, "You may speak." She spoke for 7 minutes. She spoke about the iron, and the trade, and the 4 years of market ledger entries, and the 14 impact statements on the table. She spoke about what the permit system was designed to do, and what the emergency ordinance had tried to do, and what the regional complaint was trying to do, and she named it plainly and without heat, not as injustice, which would have given the panel something to push back on, but as a pattern of specific regulatory actions, each one technically grounded and each one aimed at exactly one outcome. She was not angry. She was precise. She said at the end, "The regional charter exists to ensure that trade in this region is fair, open, and governed by rules that apply to everyone equally. I am asking this panel to affirm that those rules apply to me as they apply to every other registered market party. That is all I am asking." She sat. Elias looked at the panel. The senior member was writing something. His left colleague was looking at the trade impact statements. His right colleague was looking at Yash with an expression that was not hostile and was not indifferent. The panel deliberated for 2 hours, during which Elias sat in the waiting room and did not pace, because pacing communicated anxiety, and he was containing his anxiety with the same effort he had used on the council hall platform. And Yash sat beside him with her hands in her lap and her amber eyes quiet, not speaking. At one point she said, "If they rule against us." He said, "They will not." She said, "If they do." He said, "Then we go to the next mechanism, the regional appeals process." "There is one." She looked at him. He looked back. She said quietly, "You are very certain." "About the legal mechanisms, moderately certain," he said. "About you, entirely certain." She held his gaze, and something moved in her face, something private and real, and she reached over and covered his hand on his knee with hers and held it without saying anything more. The panel ruled in their favor. The regional complaint was dismissed. The Thorngate Assembly vote stood. The emergency ordinance was permanently barred. And the panel's written ruling included a provision that Elias had not expected, and which he suspected was the right colleague's contribution. A regional standard that permits systems in all market towns under the authority's jurisdiction must apply equally to all registered traders regardless of race or origin, enforceable through the regional court. Holt would find no second angle. The circle was closed from the top. Outside the authority building in the Caldenmore Street, in the pale winter light, Elias read the ruling a second time and then folded it carefully and put it in his coat. He looked at Yash. She was looking at the street, the Caldenmore Street, which had not been particularly welcoming the last time she had been here, and which was now a place where she had just won. She turned and looked at him, and the amber eyes were very bright, and she said, "That provision, the regional standard." "I did not ask for it," he said. "I think the panel, I know," she said. "It was not your doing." He looked at her. "Does it feel different?" he asked. "To win it legally, officially, with it in writing." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "It feels like something that cannot be taken back." He nodded. She said, "Thank you." And the word was not the thank you of politeness or transaction. It was the thank you of a person who had been fighting alone for a very long time and had learned unexpectedly and overwhelmingly that they were not alone. He said, "You did this." "We did this," she said. They rode back to Thorngate in 3 days, the same road. And on the last night on the road they sat at the fire again, and she was quiet for a long time in a way that was different from her usual quiet, not watching, not calculating, but simply present. The fire was good, the way he built them, and the stars were very clear. She said, "I want to ask you something." "Ask," he said. "In the Orc custom," she said carefully, "when a woman names her Kethvar and that bond is acknowledged by both, there is a completion. A claiming that is said in front of the camp elder or in front of whatever witness the woman chooses." She paused. "It is not a ceremony exactly. It is a statement. That we are Kethvar to each other, said out loud to someone who records it." He looked at her. The firelight was on her face. She said, "I am asking if you would do that with me." He said, "When?" She said, "When we go to the camp in spring, if you still want to come." He said, "I will always want to come." He looked at her steadily. "And yes, I will say it with you, in front of whoever you choose." She looked at him with an expression that went through about 5 things in very rapid succession, and arrived at something that was simple and open and unlike anything she had shown the world in the council hall or the courtroom or the market street. Something that was just her, the person under the warrior's steadiness, the person who had sat close to a fire in a blizzard because she was cold and stayed close because she had found something she had not been looking for. She said softly, "You are remarkable." "I am ordinary," he said. "No," she said, for the second time since they had met with the same finality as the first. "You are not." She moved to him across the fire space, and he opened his arms and she came into them, her warmth enormous and surrounding. And he held her in the firelight, and she held him back, and the stars were very present above them, and the road back to Thorngate was 1 day long. The dawn after the blizzard had been white and quiet and new. This dawn, the dawn of the last road camp before Thorngate, was gray and pale, and edged with the first specific warmth that meant the world was deciding to be spring even if it was not quite ready to commit. He woke with her head against his shoulder, and the fire burned to white ash beside them, and the road ahead was clear. She woke when he shifted, eyes open immediately, and she looked at him the way she had looked at him in the shed, checking, registering, deciding. And then the registering turned into something else, something slower and warmer, and she said simply, "Morning." "Morning," he said. They lay still for a moment in the cold gray light, not moving because there was nowhere that was more urgent than here. She said, "Thorngate today." "Thorngate today," he agreed. "And spring in a few weeks." "And spring," he said. "And the camp. And the elder." She turned her head and looked at him, her black hair loose from the bone pins in the night, her amber eyes very close and very warm. She said, "Are you ready for that?" he said. "I have been ready since the blizzard." She looked at him for a long moment. Then she smiled, a full smile, not the almost smile or the corner of the mouth movement, but a real one, broad and open, and with every degree of warmth she had been keeping in reserve through councils and courtrooms and cold mountain roads. And it transformed her face the way the sun transformed the mountain, completely and without apology. He thought, there it is. There she is. And he understood that this was the real thing he had found, the thing the long roads had been leading to without knowing it. Not a home made of walls, but a home made of this, of her looking at him like that, of the word Kethvar and the iron cord and the fire built tight at the base. They rode into Thorngate with the morning light flat and gold across the market square, the snow still white on the rooftops, and the market stalls opening for business one by one, the town waking up around them. The south gate guard nodded to Elias and looked at Yash and nodded to her too, which was new, a small thing, a correct thing. They stopped the horses in the square. The market was all around them, the noise and the commerce and the politics and all of it, the place where they had started and the place they had made together. Yash looked at the market. Then she looked at him. She said, "Home." He said, "Home." And the morning went on around them, ordinary and extraordinary, the two of them the only thing standing perfectly still in it. Alderman Holt resigned his post in late winter, citing health reasons that no one in Thorngate fully believed, and the council seat went to a younger merchant who had been one of the 9 who voted against the permit system. He was not a reformer exactly, but he was practical, and practical people in markets understood that the regional standard meant that fighting the non-human traders was now a losing battle on every front. Thorngate's market composition, quietly and without fanfare, settled. Yash's iron stall did not move. It had its permanent spot on the east side of the square, the lock box under the floor, the bundles of clean cauldron iron stacked precisely. By the time spring arrived properly, she had taken on a Thorngate resident apprentice, a young man who had been doing rough labor and who had expressed an interest in the trade and who she had assessed with approximately 3 direct questions, and then hired on the spot. Elias had watched this and thought that she did everything the way she did iron. No waste, no approximation, exactly what was needed. He had his post, and he had his roots within the market, and he had, in the drafty upper room above the supply depot that was significantly less drafty than it had been, and which now had a second chair, and a small shelf of books that were his, and a second set of travel gear that was hers, a life, shared and specific and built of real things. The spring journey to the cauldron camps was different from the autumn one. The pass was muddy, as promised, and they took it slower, and the valley was muddy too, but with the particular productive mud of a place coming back to life, and the long houses were open, and the communal fire was burning, and the children were out, and the camp was fully, noisily, entirely itself. The old elder met them at the edge of the central space. She was a small woman for an orc, compact with age, with eyes that had the same seeing quality as Yash's, the ability to look at a thing and arrive at its truth without commentary. She looked at Elias for a long moment. He stood under the looking without flinching. She said, in common tongue, "You kept the stall." He said, "She kept the stall. I helped with the paperwork." The elder's eyes moved to Yash, who was standing beside him with the exact stillness of a person who is trying very hard not to appear to be waiting for something. The elder said something in the orc tongue. Yash responded. The elder said something else brief, and Yash, who never showed uncertainty, made a small, uncontrolled motion, just her hands, just a slight opening of them, the way a person reacted to something that landed exactly where they most needed it to. He asked her later what the elder had said. She said, "You have the eyes of someone who knows where he is." He thought about that for a moment. "What does that mean?" "It means you are not looking past things for something else," she said. "You are here, in the specific place you are." A pause. "It is harder than it sounds." He thought of the roads and the moving and the specific moment in the blizzard shed when he had built the fire and held still and let something rare come close. "I know," he said. The claiming was simple, the way real things were simple. In front of the elder and a circle of camp members at the communal fire in the evening, Yash spoke the words in the orc tongue and then in the common tongue, looking at him the whole time. He spoke them back in both the common tongue first, and then in the orc tongue, badly enough that someone at the edge of the circle laughed, and not badly enough that the meaning was lost. The elder put her hand on each of their wrists over the matching iron cords and pressed the iron beads and said one word in the orc tongue that Yash told him afterward meant stands. Stands. As in, this stands. As in, this is real and acknowledged and here. They stood at the communal fire with the camp around them, the spring evening warm compared to the pass, the stars very clear, and she took his hand and held it at her side. And he stood next to her with everything he was, the ordinary man, the caravan guard, the fire builder, the reader of charters, the person who had stopped moving, and felt, fully and without qualification, that he was where he was supposed to be. She looked at him at some point in the evening with the amber eyes that missed nothing and said quietly just to him, "The blizzard." "The blizzard," he agreed. "I was furious about the horse," she said. He laughed. "I know. And the canopy and the storm," a pause. "And then you walked into the shed and built a fire and sat down and did not make it into anything, and she stopped, looked at the fire. I had been so cold for so long." He looked at her. He knew she did not mean the temperature. He did not say so. She said, "You were enough fire for two." He said, "Always." She looked at him, and the amber eyes were everything she was, the warrior and the trader, and the woman who left every spring and came back every autumn and had stopped, finally, for the specific reason of him. And she said nothing else because there was nothing else to say that was not already there in the chords and the fire and the word that meant stands. The spring night was very warm and very long, and the fire between them burned exactly the way he had built it, tight at the base, steady in the middle, free at the top. It burned until dawn. And at dawn, which was quiet and pale gold over the valley, with the camp still sleeping and the mountains very clear against the pale sky, they stood at the edge of the camp and looked at the world that was laid out for them, the valley and the pass and the road south and Thorngate, 3 days away, waiting with its market and its stall and its drafty but improved upper room. He said, "We should go back in a week. The spring market." She said, "I know. Your apprentice will need supervision." "He will manage," she said. "He is more capable than he looks," a pause, "like someone else I know." He looked at her sideways and she looked back, and the thing in her eyes that he had first seen in the blizzard shed, that unlocking, that opening door, was fully open now, wide and permanent, and it was the most beautiful thing he had ever been shown. He said, "Kethvar." She said it back in her own tongue, which was the real tongue for it, the one that held the full meaning of the person you stop being alone for. The morning light grew. The valley was very green after the snow. The mountains around them were enormous and old and entirely indifferent to the small human man, and the tall orc woman standing at their edge, which was exactly right, because the mountains did not need to be impressed, and neither did they. They were simply there, the two of them, on the first morning of a thing that had no end in sight, and required no audience and asked nothing of the world except to be allowed to stand. It stood. The two of them, the only thing left standing after all of it, the blizzard, the council, the court, the regional authority, the long roads and the long winters standing together in a pale gold dawn, close enough to share warmth, which was exactly what they had always been.